It starts with a pattern so bizarre, so statistically impossible, that historians still argue about whether it's proof of fate, randomness, or something far stranger. Imagine two world leaders, born 100 years apart, rising to power during moments of national crisis. Both guiding a divided nation, both adored and hated, and both assassinated in ways that mirror each other almost perfectly. This isn't fiction. This is one of the strangest sets of coincidences in American history, and it's only the beginning of a long list of mysteries that still have no explanation. Everyone has heard the basics of the Lincoln-Kennedy coincidences, but most people don't know just how deep the parallels go. Abraham Lincoln was elected to Congress in 1846. John F. Kennedy, 1946. Lincoln became president in 1860. Kennedy in 1960. Both men were shot in the head on a Friday, both in the presence of their wives, both in a public setting filled with cheering crowds one moment and total chaos the next. Lincoln was shot in Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a car made by Ford. The model of the car? A Lincoln. If that were all, you could call it a fascinating coincidence. But it keeps going. Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, was born in 1839. Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was born in 1939. Both assassins were known by 3 names. Both names added up to 15 letters. Booth fled a theater and was caught in a warehouse. Oswald fled a warehouse and was caught in a theater. Both assassins were themselves murdered before they could stand trial. Historians and mathematicians have tried to explain this away. With enough variables, coincidences happen, but the human brain isn't satisfied with that answer. Because at some point, a coincidence stops feeling random. It starts feeling like the universe winking at you, whispering that maybe history isn't as chaotic as we pretend. Maybe there are patterns we haven't learned to see yet. But if Lincoln and Kennedy are the warm-up, the real show begins when we zoom out. Throughout history, bizarre coincidences appear again and again, across continents, across centuries, across cultures. Events repeating themselves, lives mirroring each other, disasters unfolding in impossible patterns. And in every case, you're left with one question: how? Take the story of Violet Jessup. If destiny is real, she must have been its favorite experiment. Violet was a stewardess and nurse in the early 1900s, working on luxury ocean liners. In 1911, she survived a collision involving the HMS Olympic. A year later, she was aboard the Titanic when it struck an iceberg and sank. She escaped on Lifeboat 16, a moment she later described as eerily calm, almost dreamlike. But that wasn't the end. In 1916, she was working as a nurse on the HMHS Britannic, the Titanic's sister ship, when it hit a mine and began sinking. Violet jumped overboard, struck her head on the ship's propeller, and still survived. 3 near-identical maritime disasters. Same era, same family of ships, same woman, surviving all 3. Statisticians tried to crunch the numbers. The odds are so ridiculously low that even experts shrug and say, there is no mathematical explanation that feels satisfying. But Jessup isn't the only person who seems to orbit disaster. In 1971, Coconut Grove nightclub fire survivor Clifford Johnson was declared dead at the scene, then revived. That alone is remarkable. But over the next few decades, he survived a hotel fire, a car explosion, and a chemical accident at work. Statistically impossible doesn't begin to describe it. Some researchers have suggested genetic resistance, while others propose psychological calm during emergencies. But the truth? No one can explain why some people walk through catastrophe after catastrophe, and come out alive every single time. Of course, coincidences aren't always about survival. Sometimes they're about repetition, disasters echoing themselves like ripples in time. Consider the story of two brothers in Bermuda. In 1975, a man riding a moped was struck and killed by a taxi driven by a man carrying a passenger. Exactly 1 year later, the victim's brother was riding the same moped on the same street when he was hit and killed by the same taxi, driven by the same driver, carrying the same passenger. People debated whether it was staged. It wasn't. Investigations confirmed everything. Same driver, same passenger, same vehicle model, same road, same date on the calendar. The odds, beyond calculation. Once again, the universe offers a pattern with no satisfying explanation. Some coincidences are so perfect, they feel like cosmic jokes. In 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers vanished from the Flannan Isles in Scotland. No bodies, no signs of struggle. The table was set, the lamps were trimmed, and in the logbook, one of the last entries described a terrible storm. The problem? There was no storm recorded that day. Nothing. Completely calm weather. The official explanation said the men were swept out to sea, yet all 3 disappearing at once with zero trace seems strange enough. But here's where it gets weird. This exact scenario had happened before. In 1801, 3 lighthouse keepers vanished from the island of Eilean Mor. Same number of men, same remote conditions, same total mystery. 2 identical disappearances, 99 years apart. No answers then, no answers now. Sometimes, coincidences take the form of historical echoes. Moments repeating themselves so closely, it's hard to believe no one's reading from a script. In 1895, 2 men who had never met, Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen and Nikola Tesla, independently discovered the principles behind X-rays. They ran entirely separate experiments. They lived in different countries. They followed different paths. But their discoveries happened almost simultaneously, within weeks of each other. This phenomenon is actually so common that scientists have a name for it: multiples. It includes calculus, Newton and Leibniz, the telephone, Bell and Gray, and the theory of evolution, Darwin and Wallace. The coincidences are so consistent that some historians argue major discoveries are inevitable. If one person doesn't make them, someone else will. But even then, the timing often feels too perfect to be chalked up to pure chance. But coincidences don't just shape science. They shape crime, fate, and sometimes even life itself. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe published a novel called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. In it, 4 shipwrecked sailors draw lots to see who will be eaten for survival. The one sacrificed, a cabin boy named Richard Parker. 46 years later, a real ship called the Mignonette sank, leaving 4 survivors stranded. When starvation set in, they drew lots, and the one who was killed and eaten was a cabin boy named Richard Parker. Even stranger, historical records show multiple sailors named Richard Parker dying in shipwrecks, uprisings, and naval disasters across centuries. Maritime historians noticed the pattern, wrote about it, and still can't explain why the same uncommon name keeps appearing in the same tragic context. Coincidences also show up in politics, in ways that make you question whether history is glitching. 2 of America's most famous presidents, separated by a century, share nearly identical assassination details is already strange. But the Lincoln-Kennedy parallel isn't alone. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, 2 founding fathers, both died on July 4, 1826. Same day, same year. exactly 50 years after they signed the Declaration of Independence. Adams's last words were reportedly, "Thomas Jefferson survives," unaware that Jefferson had died earlier the same day. Historians point out that life expectancy was shorter then, that the date was symbolic, that the men were old. But even with that context, the mathematical probability of two of the most important figures in early American history dying on the exact 50th anniversary of the country's founding feels uncanny. But let's go deeper. Patterns aren't just something humans notice. They're something we create without realizing it. In 1914, a man named Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, triggering World War I. Most people know that part, but hardly anyone knows the strangest detail. After the assassination, the Archduke's license plate was photographed. It read, "A 3118. The armistice that ended World War I was signed on November 11th, 18. Same numbers, same sequence. A coincidence so perfect that many people assume it's fake. It isn't. Coincidences also appear in literature in ways that feel prophetic. Mark Twain, for example, was born in 1835, shortly after Halley's Comet passed Earth. Later in life, he famously said, "I came in with Halley's Comet, and I expect to go out with it." And he did. He died in 1910, the very next time Halley's Comet appeared. Was it luck? A prediction? Or something deeper? Twain himself believed it was fate, writing that the cosmos must have appointed it so. Some coincidences edge into the supernatural, not because they are paranormal, but because our rational explanations feel too weak to deal with them. Consider the story of the world's most unlucky and lucky man, Tsutomu Yamaguchi. On August 6, 1945, he was in Hiroshima on a business trip when the atomic bomb fell. He survived with burns and ruptured eardrums. 3 days later, he returned home to Nagasaki. And on that day, the second atomic bomb fell. He survived that too. Not only that, he lived to age 93. When Yamaguchi died, newspapers called him the man the world could not kill. Scientists analyzed the radiation doses, the physics of distance, the structures he hid behind, but still admitted that his survival was statistically microscopic. Once again, the universe rolls its dice and somehow lands on the same impossible number twice. But coincidences don't just happen to people. They happen to places. In 1665, London was devastated by the Great Plague. 1 year later, in 1666, the city was nearly destroyed again, this time by the Great Fire of London. Back-to-back catastrophes that reshaped the entire identity of a city. But here's the coincidence most people don't realize. Both disasters stopped just short of wiping London out completely. The plague ended suddenly, long before it reached its peak potential. The fire, which should have burned for weeks, mysteriously died after just 4 days. Scientists cite wind direction, humidity, structural factors, but none of the official explanations fully add up. Two near-apocalyptic events, both ending early, both preserving the city against all odds. Then there's the story of the man who saved the world, twice, without anyone knowing. In 1983, Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov was monitoring a nuclear early warning system when it showed several incoming American missiles. Protocol demanded he report it immediately, triggering a retaliatory strike. Instead, Petrov went with a gut feeling. It must be an error. And he was right. The system had misread sunlight reflections as missiles. Experts later calculated that if he had followed orders, the world would likely have entered full-scale nuclear war. But here's the coincidence. Almost the exact same scenario happened again in 1995. Norwegian scientists launched a weather rocket. Russian radars mistook it for a U.S. missile. Boris Yeltsin was handed the nuclear command briefcase. For the first time in history, it was activated. And then, the military hesitated. Someone noticed the flight path didn't match. Another gut feeling. Another near apocalypse avoided. 2 nuclear close calls. Same mistake. Same psychological impulse. Wait, something feels off. Coincidence? Intuition? Fate? Or just dumb luck saving us from ourselves? Coincidences also show up in nature. Some so perfect it's hard not to wonder if the world likes patterns as much as we do. In the Amazon rainforest, botanists discovered 2 species of tree that flower on the exact same day every 17 years. Despite being miles apart, in different ecosystems, with no shared pollination system. Why 17 years? Why synchronized? There is no clear answer. Climatologists argue it's related to rainfall cycles. Evolutionary biologists insist it's about predator avoidance. But 17-year cycles are rare in nature, and 2 unrelated species following the same hidden clock feels like a secret built into the forest itself. One of the strangest coincidences in physics involves the constant that determines the strength of electromagnetic forces. If it were slightly stronger or weaker, atoms wouldn't form, stars wouldn't shine, life wouldn't exist. Physicists call this the fine-tuning problem. But here's the twist. The number is almost identical to ratios found in quantum mechanics, cosmology, and even biology. Random? Maybe. But every time scientists dig into the universe, they find the same numbers repeating across unrelated systems, like cosmic fingerprints. But coincidences don't need to be cosmic to be unsettling. In 2002, a Finnish man in his 70s was struck and killed by a truck while crossing a highway. 2 hours later, another man was struck and killed at the same location. Same circumstances, same age, same nationality. The 2 men were identical twins. They lived separate lives and were traveling separately. Neither knew the other was nearby. Investigators ruled out foul play entirely. The coincidences were just coincidences. The story made international headlines because the odds seemed so tiny, they bordered on impossible. You see this pattern everywhere in history. The universe repeating itself, creating loops, echoes, parallels. In 1833, a meteor storm filled the sky with thousands of falling stars. The event was so dramatic that enslaved people in the American South believed Judgment Day had arrived. Exactly 33 years later, in 1866, the exact same meteor shower returned. Same intensity, same atmospheric conditions, same date. Astronomers later learned it was the Leonid meteor storm, which peaks every 33 years. But imagine being alive in that era, seeing the sky fall twice in your lifetime on the same night, with no scientific explanation. 2 identical cosmic events separated by a single lifetime is the kind of coincidence that shapes religion, art, culture, and fear. Some coincidences, though, are so human, they almost feel designed. In 1973, Anthony Hopkins was cast in a film adaptation of The Girl from Petrovka. He tried to buy the book for research, but couldn't find it anywhere. Later that day, he found a copy abandoned on a train bench. When he opened it, he discovered handwritten notes in the margins. Fast forward to filming, Hopkins meets the book's author, who tells him he lost his personal annotated copy somewhere in London. Hopkins hands him the book. It was the same copy. But perhaps the most haunting coincidences involve death. In 1950, a man named Joseph Figlock was sweeping a street in Detroit when a baby fell from a window and landed on him. Figlock broke the baby's fall, saving its life. 1 year later, in another part of Detroit, Figlock was sweeping again. And another baby fell from another window, landing on his shoulders. Both children survived. Both families were unrelated. Both falls were ruled accidents. Figlock became a local legend, a guardian angel by coincidence. And then there's the story of Enzo Ferrari and Mesut Özil. At first glance, they have nothing in common. One is the founder of a legendary automotive empire, the other, a German footballer. But when Ferrari died in 1988, a young Mesut Özil hadn't even been born. Years later, fans noticed something shocking. The two men looked nearly identical. Same facial structure, same eyes, same expression. The resemblance is so uncanny that conspiracy theories exploded online. Historians argued genetic coincidence, while others mentioned reincarnation, jokingly or otherwise. But the real eerie part? Özil was born the same year Ferrari's final independent model line was discontinued. Symbolic? Probably not. But strange enough that millions noticed. When you take all these stories together, mirrored assassinations, repeating disasters, identical lives, prophetic fiction, historical echoes, cosmic timing, you begin to realize something important. Human beings crave explanations. We want cause and effect, logic and order. But coincidences live in the cracks between those ideas. They're reminders that not everything follows a clean narrative. They challenge our belief that we understand how the world works. Scientists argue that coincidences are simply the universe doing what it always does, producing random events in a chaotic system and letting human brains connect the dots afterward. Statisticians point out that with billions of people and trillions of events, strange patterns are inevitable. Given enough time, they say, anything that can happen will happen. But that explanation feels too neat, too safe, too mathematical for stories that feel almost poetic. Because when you hear about a man who survived 2 atomic bombs, or a woman who lived through 3 shipwrecks, or twins dying in identical accidents an hour apart, you're not thinking about probability distributions. You're thinking about fate, about destiny, about the possibility that the universe has a sense of humor, or a sense of rhythm. Maybe coincidences are messages. Maybe they're mirrors. Maybe they're just reminders that life is stranger than fiction, that randomness can feel like design, and that history is full of secrets we haven't even begun to understand. But one thing is certain: the more we look for patterns, the more we find them. And the more we find them, the more we're forced to confront a question that has no scientific answer, no historical solution, and no mathematical comfort. Are coincidences just accidents of time? Or is the universe trying to tell us something?